74 days have passed since the localized security cameras at Nancy Guthrie's residence went completely dark, and today the federal investigation has rapidly shifted toward an emergency arrest warrant built around a phone transmission lasting exactly 9 seconds. While local authorities spent 2 months searching the Arizona desert for an extraction vehicle, the Department of Justice executed a specialized tactical operation based on cellular telemetry. The suspect taken into custody is identified in federal documents as Derrick Callella. Now, the official charge is extortion through interstate communications. The criminal complaint alleges Callella transmitted 2 digital text messages and initiated 1 audio connection. These communications demanded financial compensation for the return of the 84-year-old victim. This sudden arrest introduces a severe complication into the existing forensic timeline. We must examine the mechanical reality of this telecommunications data. If this 9-second audio transmission is simply an opportunistic scam exploiting a high-profile tragedy, we must question the federal response protocol. The Department of Justice rarely deploys tactical resources for standard wire fraud occurring across state lines. The operational urgency implies the digital footprint generated during those 9 seconds intersects with classified evidence recovered from the physical crime scene. This intersection suggests the caller possessed specific data points regarding the abduction that remain withheld from national media outlets. We are analyzing a scenario where a suspected prank caller holds a verified operational detail concerning the individual who physically breached the house at 1:47 in the morning. This is Evidence with John, and today we are decoding the digital footprint the suspect attempted to conceal. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications because the federal timeline for this investigation is actively shifting. We will rely exclusively on verified documents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pima County Sheriff's Department to analyze this newly acquired telecom data. The public narrative claims the 9-second call was a meaningless distraction. The spatial data suggests it might be the primary mechanism to identify the suspect carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. To comprehend the value of this recent digital forensic breakthrough, we must recalibrate the timeline of the initial abduction. The physical parameters of this crime are strictly constrained by the medical profile of the victim. According to reports from the Associated Press, Tommaso Cioni drove his mother-in-law to her residence on January 31st. The garage door officially closed at 9:50 in the evening. Nancy Guthrie relies on daily cardiovascular medication. Her physical mobility is severely restricted by a specialized pacemaker and related age factors. She does not possess the physical capacity to orchestrate her own disappearance or navigate rugged terrain without immediate sustained assistance. The verified timeline provides a narrow window of total silence lasting nearly 4 hours. At precisely 1:47 in the morning, on February 1st, an unidentified male suspect wearing a facial obscuration device directly disabled the residential security camera. The Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed this suspect carried a medium-capacity tactical bag. They specifically identified this item as a 21 to 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. The physical evidence from the property perimeter establishes a highly organized rapid extraction. The suspect bypassed exterior security checks and located the primary surveillance node with absolute spatial precision. The camera disconnection resulted in total visual blindness for law enforcement because the victim did not maintain an active cloud storage subscription. The localized hardware was mechanically neutralized by physical force. The suspect understood the exact placement and the structural vulnerability of the surveillance equipment. The physical crime scene yielded no immediate digital imagery of the specific extraction route or the transport vehicle utilized for the abduction. The architectural environment went entirely silent after the lens was removed and the internal wiring was severed. While the physical residential security system failed, the regional telecommunications network continued recording ambient background data. This localized hardware blindness is precisely why the 9-second extortion call fundamentally alters the trajectory of the investigation. A physical location can be chemically scrubbed of biological DNA and latent fingerprints using standard industrial compounds. However, every cellular transmission generates an immutable spatial record across multiple localized routing stations and switching centers. The camera feed was cut and the visual timeline ended at 1:47 in the morning, leaving investigators with zero structural evidence. Several days later, a telephone connected to the internal family network rang, indicating a targeted communication strike. The investigative priority immediately shifted from analyzing physical terrain in Pima County to tracking spatial anomalies within the digital cellular grid. The data packets containing that 9-second audio file hold the exact geographic coordinates of the transmitter. The localized architectural environment went entirely silent after the surveillance lens was removed, but the regional telecommunications network continued recording ambient background data. This hardware blindness establishes precisely why the 9-second extortion call fundamentally altered the trajectory of the federal investigation. A physical geographic location can be chemically scrubbed of biological evidence using standard industrial compounds. However, every cellular transmission generates an immutable spatial record across multiple localized routing stations and network switching centers. The investigative priority immediately shifted from analyzing physical terrain in Pima County to tracking digital anomalies within the cellular grid. Official documents from the Department of Justice outlined the mechanical execution of this targeted communication strike. The suspect utilized a device to transmit 2 digital text messages directly to the internal family network. These text transmissions were followed by an audio connection lasting exactly 9 seconds. We must analyze the statistical probability required to execute this specific sequence. The perpetrator bypassed external public telephone lines and routed communications directly to an unlisted internal routing number. How did an unidentified individual acquire a private communication channel within 96 hours of an unpublicized physical abduction? The mathematical probability of randomized number generation successfully connecting to the precise victim network during an active federal investigation is statistically zero. The Federal Bureau of Investigation recognized this mathematical impossibility immediately upon reviewing the digital logs. The Department of Justice does not authorize emergency tactical interventions or localized raids for standard telemarketing anomalies across state lines. The federal authorities mobilize rapidly because the digital text messages contain specific operational verbiage. This verbiage correlated with classified spatial data recovered from the Pima County physical crime scene. The 9-second audio connection functioned essentially as a digital beacon for network analysts. The transmission allowed federal communications specialists to triangulate the exact cellular tower processing the extortion demand. They initiated the arrest protocol because the network telemetry proved the device was pinging off a verified localized grid. The tactical operation successfully secured Derrick Callella and isolated his primary communication devices for forensic extraction. The subsequent digital data analysis yielded a critical operational failure for the primary investigation. Digital forensic extraction protocols confirmed Derrick Callella is not the primary abduction suspect. Federal interrogations verified. He never breached the physical perimeter of the Guthrie residence at 1:47 in the morning. He functioned exclusively as an opportunistic scavenger exploiting digital communication networks for immediate financial manipulation. He systematically monitored regional emergency dispatch frequencies and manufactured the ransom demands using secondary information scraped from open-source intelligence networks. He weaponized the informational vacuum created by the disabled security camera to extract financial compensation. The localized judicial system in Arizona processed his arraignment and immediately approved his release on standard bail. An individual who intentionally disrupted an active federal kidnapping protocol involving an 84-year-old medical patient is currently walking free. The local court system granted this standard bail despite the severe operational interference caused by the false digital trail. This systemic leniency generated massive logistical complications for the primary federal task force. The investigative units expended critical tactical resources tracking a phantom cellular signal while the actual physical suspect gained 96 hours of unimpeded geographic mobility. The resolution of this telecommunications anomaly forces a severe operational reset for all involved agencies. We must abandon the digital communication network and return to the physical parameters of the residential architecture. The individual carrying the 25-liter Ozark Trail tactical bag remains entirely unidentified and outside federal radar. The mechanical execution of the camera neutralization requires physical proximity and premeditated spatial awareness. The extraction of an 84-year-old individual requiring cardiovascular medication necessitates specific transport logistics. If you want to understand how the forensic profile shifts from digital telemetry to molecular biology, subscribe to the channel right now. Diverting attention from artificial digital signatures, federal analysts redirected their focus toward infallible biological realities. The physical architectural exterior of the targeted residence contained a microscopic forensic narrative. Investigators isolated specific molecular anomalies deposited across the exterior porch surface area. Chemical reagents systematically confirmed the presence of human hemoglobin distributed along the concrete threshold. Federal DNA extraction protocols definitively match this biological material to the elderly victim. We must objectively analyze the spatial geometry of these specific fluid deposits. The localized volume and directional spatter patterns provide critical kinetic data regarding the physical extraction. A high velocity impact generates a fundamentally different localized pattern than a slow sustained drag. The physiological reality of an elderly patient dictates a severe physical vulnerability during tactical transport. The documented biological presence on the porch indicates a catastrophic medical event occurred prior to vehicular loading. The perpetrator failed to maintain a sterile extraction environment despite their deliberate hardware sabotage. This degradation of operational control extended significantly beyond the immediate residential perimeter. According to investigative reports from the Associated Press, authorities recovered a pair of discarded gloves. This critical textile evidence was located precisely 2 miles away from the primary extraction zone. We must analyze this specific geographic radius using established spatial profiling metrics. A 2-mile distance represents a calculated disposal vector rather than a randomized operational drop. The perpetrator maintained possession of the protective equipment during the initial high-risk transit phase. They subsequently discarded the textiles once the immediate proximity threat decreased to a mathematically acceptable level. This specific discard location establishes a verifiable directional heading for the primary transport vehicle. The fabric composition of these gloves represents a profound forensic vulnerability for the unidentified suspect. Internal textile layers routinely trap microscopic epidermal cells and localized organic perspiration deposits. Federal laboratory technicians utilize specialized vacuum infrastructure to extract this trapped genetic material. The presence of these textiles indicates the suspect understood fundamental fingerprint suppression tactics. However, they severely underestimated the persistence of secondary transfer DNA within synthetic fabric weaves. The exterior surfaces of the gloves likely contain trace elements transferred directly from the primary crime scene. These microscopic transfers could include residential paint fragments or specific vegetative matter from the perimeter. Analyzing the precise degradation level of the biological material helps establish an exact chronological drop time. Environmental factors including localized humidity and ambient temperature actively accelerate the cellular decay process. Forensic meteorologists calculate these environmental variables to determine exactly how long the textiles remained exposed. The biological indicators present an undeniable physical reality regarding the violent external extraction process. However, the chronological parameters surrounding this specific event remain severely fractured and mechanically illogical. The verified investigative timeline contains a massive temporal void spanning nearly 4 entire hours. The local law enforcement authorities verified the garage structure was fully secured at 9:50. The localized hardware sabotage occurred at precisely 1:47 in the early morning. We must rigorously analyze this specific 357-minute operational interval. The behavioral profile of a standard residential burglar prioritizes immediate rapid asset extraction. They systematically minimize interior exposure time to reduce potential confrontation and tactical identification risks. This specific suspect demonstrated a completely anomalous tolerance for prolonged environmental exposure and detection risk. Did the perpetrator breach the residential perimeter before the garage door mechanically closed that evening? If they infiltrated the structure earlier, they maintained absolute physical silence for multiple hours. They navigated the internal architecture without triggering any localized ambient noise alerts or defensive responses. Conversely, if the perimeter breach occurred after the victim was secured inside, the timeline remains highly problematic. Navigating exterior residential defenses and locating the primary surveillance node requires significant temporal investment. This specific operational complexity directly intersects with the documented presence of the tactical backpack. The federal authorities explicitly documented the 25-liter volumetric capacity of this specialized bag. We must analyze the specific logistical utility of this precise spatial carrying dimension. A 25-liter internal volume is highly inefficient for transporting large physical assets or organic material. It is, however, mathematically optimized for concealing specialized mechanical intrusion, hardware, and electronic suppression tools. The suspect prioritized carrying this specific equipment load over maintaining optimal physical mobility during an abduction. This meticulous hardware preparation contrasts sharply with the catastrophic digital software anomaly at the scene. According to investigative statements provided to PBS, the localized digital network maintained a phantom digital ledger. The physical camera lens was effectively neutralized and the primary visual feed was permanently severed. Yet the internal motion detection algorithms continued functioning independently within the background software architecture. The digital sensors recorded multiple localized proximity alerts occurring after the physical hardware destruction. The localized network registered these physical movements but lacked the cloud infrastructure to compile visual data. The background software effectively documented the temporal rhythm of the physical extraction without rendering a single image. We possess the exact chronological timestamps of the suspect navigating the exterior perimeter with the victim. That intersection of biological material and precise digital timestamps provides a devastating federal forensic foundation. Federal laboratory analysts possess the necessary biological material to generate a definitive genetic suspect profile. With the verified biological samples and discarded textile fibers, the federal database should have identified a match. The regional biometric systems are designed to process this specific spatial and genetic data within 72 hours. Subscribe to the channel right now because this standard operational protocol was completely derailed. The localized investigative command structure actively intervened in the federal forensic processing sequence, altering the trajectory completely. Local law enforcement actively intervened in the federal forensic sequence and altered the trajectory. The Pima County Sheriff declined to transfer the biological evidence to the federal laboratory. Reporting from Fox News confirms Sheriff Nanos bypassed the Quantico infrastructure during this phase. He mandated the transfer of the textile evidence to an independent laboratory in Florida. This administrative directive compromised the timeline required to identify the suspect holding the backpack. Utilizing a private regional facility introduced severe structural vulnerabilities into the chain of custody. The physical transportation of biological need across multiple state lines degrades localized forensic integrity. Defense attorneys consistently weaponize these specific administrative transfers to invalidate biological evidence trials. The primary investigation was systematically delayed by internal jurisdictional conflicts rather than criminal evasion. The suspect gained a temporal advantage because authorities prioritized jurisdictional control over biometric identification. The private laboratory lacks the comprehensive database integration to cross-reference unidentified cellular material. The federal system relies on immediate data sharing across thousands of interconnected national terminals. Isolating the evidence in a private facility effectively blinded the federal behavioral analysis units. Federal authorities circumvented this administrative blockade by deploying advanced forensic genealogy against the textiles. They're no longer executing a standard search for an individual with a criminal record. The standard federal database requires an existing profile from a previous localized felony conviction. The unidentified suspect clearly possesses the operational discipline of someone avoiding standard law enforcement detection. Federal analysts are reverse engineering the genetic lineage using specialized commercial DNA databases instead. This advanced methodology bypasses local barriers and maps the biological family structure of the perpetrator. They extract microscopic genetic markers from the gloves and compare them against public ancestry records. The algorithm identifies distant biological relatives who voluntarily submitted their genetic information for commercial testing. Investigators then construct a massive family tree radiating outward from these specific genetic anchor points. They cross-reference public census data and regional birth records to isolate specific demographic targets. They are systematically eliminating regional suspects by constructing a family tree from the microscopic transfers. The forensic focus shifted from analyzing the crime scene to analyzing decades of local genealogy. Federal tactical units will deploy when the genealogical algorithm isolates the specific Pima County target. Subscribe to the channel right now because the forensic results will inevitably trigger federal action. The current operational reality as of April 15th remains unchanged regarding the physical location. The Federal Bureau of Investigation classifies the abduction as an active, ongoing criminal investigation. The elderly medical patient remains missing while the task force manages multiple parallel intelligence streams. The survival probability metrics decrease exponentially without immediate access to specialized cardiovascular pharmaceutical interventions. Derrick Callella is preparing for judicial proceedings regarding his execution of the telecommunications strike. His successful manipulation demonstrates a severe vulnerability in how regional media platforms process unverified information. The federal prosecutors will utilize his trial to establish strict legal precedents regarding digital extortion. The primary suspect who disabled the security camera at 147 remains completely unidentified. The physical location of the tactical bag remains unknown to federal law enforcement authorities. We must logically assume the perpetrator successfully destroyed the extraction vehicle to eliminate forensic trace. The investigation hinges entirely upon the genealogical data extraction processing within the federal laboratory infrastructure. We must continuously monitor the regional judicial dockets for sealed federal indictments from the Justice Department. Federal agencies utilize sealed indictments to prevent targeted suspects from detecting an impending tactical operation. Are federal surveillance teams maintaining operational oversight on a specific family within the Pima County jurisdiction? The prolonged federal silence suggests they are actively securing the perimeter around a primary target. The localized geographic profile indicates the suspect maintains deep logistical ties to the regional environment. Navigating the localized desert terrain in total darkness requires intimate spatial awareness and physical preparation. The digital telecommunications anomaly generated massive temporary confusion, but the microscopic biological evidence remains objective. The federal apparatus is methodically closing the jurisdictional gaps created during the initial chaotic hours. The forensic timeline is currently consolidating around the genetic data extracted from the exterior perimeter. Security surveillance software maintains perfect operational honesty, but it only functions when continuously financed. The catastrophic failure of the residential optical system highlights a critical vulnerability in localized defense. Physical hardware remains highly susceptible to blunt force neutralization by determined tactical intruders. However, remote cloud servers maintain data integrity regardless of the localized damage inflicted on-site. The victim possessed the necessary optical sensors but neglected the digital subscription infrastructure. This administrative oversight allowed a physical perimeter breach to erase all critical visual evidence. Intruders can mechanically dismantle a camera lens, but they cannot smash a decentralized server. Maintaining an active remote data connection serves as the ultimate digital failsafe during home invasions. The optical data transmits instantaneously, securing the visual perimeter before hardware destruction physically occurs. The absence of a standard monthly cloud subscription effectively paralyzed a federal task force. This simple financial calculation provides a direct operational advantage to perpetrators executing premeditated breaches. Citizens must recognize that their digital perimeter is equally as vital as physical locks. Evaluating personal risk requires auditing both physical access points and digital data retention policies. What this case teaches us about forensic gaps extends beyond simple localized hardware malfunction. It demonstrates how administrative security failures directly empower both physical intruders and digital parasites. The digital extortion attempt exposes the psychological profile of modern network scavengers like the accused. These opportunistic predators systematically monitor digital police scanners and regional tragedy broadcasts for vulnerabilities. They weaponize public grief by inserting themselves into the informational vacuum of active federal cases. This predatory behavior actively degrades the operational efficiency of highly specialized tactical response units. Modern cellular scavengers understand this technological threshold and exploit networks lacking verifiable visual safeguards. They calculate the probability of unverified data streams and launch targeted financial extraction strikes. A compromised security network provides the specific operational darkness required for a physical abduction. Simultaneously, that same lack of verified data allows opportunistic criminals to manufacture profitable chaos. Law enforcement must battle the physical absence of the victim while filtering artificial digital noise. The intersection of inadequate residential technology and predatory digital tactics created a jurisdictional nightmare. When a regional visual network fails, the investigative burden shifts entirely to microscopic trace. This transition drastically extends the timeline required to execute a localized tactical arrest warrant. We must return to the severe chronological discrepancy during the night of January 31st. A vast temporal void exists between the secured garage and the severed optical feed. An unidentified individual occupied the perimeter darkness for nearly 4 complete hours without detection. Did they observe the internal architectural layout while waiting for maximum localized physical vulnerability? Analyzing this specific temporal vacuum is crucial for understanding the methodology of the primary suspect. The investigative parameters remain tightly focused on the events preceding 147. We will cover every developmental shift in this forensic timeline exactly as it occurs. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the final genealogical data extraction. An 84-year-old medical patient cannot simply evaporate into the regional atmosphere. Molecular biology and localized trace evidence provide an immutable record of objective physical reality. They executed a flawless hardware sabotage but failed to maintain biological sterility during extraction. This singular forensic failure guarantees their eventual identification by federal laboratory technicians. The microscopic cellular material trapped within synthetic textile fibers provides an undeniable genetic roadmap. Law enforcement agencies are no longer searching blindly across the vast Arizona desert terrain. They are navigating the precise ancestral history of the individual who breached that perimeter. Someone currently possesses the remaining contents of that 25-liter tactical backpack. They understand the federal genealogical algorithms are systematically eliminating their geographic buffer zone. The biological sequence is actively counting down toward a definitive biometric identity match.